we take this back to the science of hope, right? Because this is about remembering that there's an urgent need for this. And Dr. Edward Barksdale, who is the Surgeon-in-Chief of Rainbow Babies and Children Hospital, is going to tell us why we can't wait. The urgent call for hope.
Let's see if I can get a bit untangled. Thank you so much. How's everyone? This has been such deeply spiritual and profound discussions. I am delighted to spend the time with you all. I'm Ed Barksdale, Surgeon-in-Chief of Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. As you've heard, I'm a pediatric surgeon. I spend my days operating on children who were born too soon with life-threatening problems. My special interest is children with cancer. But I also take care of children who have been shot in one of America's greatest cities, but one that sits at the precipice of hope. The talks, the science, the stories, the discourse, the camaraderie have all been informative, insightful, provocative, and transformative. Catherine, thank you so much for inviting me. Scott, thank you for the dinner last night in the organization. Tom, thank you. Zoria, there you are in the back. You guys wearing Steeler colors on this Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So the organizers have mandated me at this late hour to be brief. So I will do my best, because I know that I'm standing between you and the reception, and those of you who we call it 2 carbon fragments who partake in adult beverages are eager to do that. But I would be remiss if I showed up today to talk about hope and not present to you a little bit of the personal, a little bit of the professional, a little bit of the actionable, and a whole lot of the aspirational. And so I want to talk to you today about one of my favorite books, Why We Can't Wait, by Martin Luther King, which was a call to action with regard to the civil rights movement. But if we think about this time, I think that our greatest struggle from the perspective of human rights is the urgent call for hope. Here I am, as a young boy growing up in Lynchburg, Virginia, at the end of the Jim Crow era. Injustice ran through the streets of Lynchburg like rain after a heavy storm, directing those streets where I played catch and directing my dreams, my aspirations to the place that the water would run. This created for me an intense feeling of hopelessness and despair. Neither of my parents went to college. My mother was a high school dropout seamstress in a sock factory, and my father was a postman. Both of them taught me 2 lessons of hope. The first lesson I would hear very late at night in our house that was just a little bit larger than normal, when you hear the when the television goes off. I would hear my mother's prayers. My mother would say, Almighty, protect my son from all harm. Keep him from all disabling disease. But above all, Lord, give him a sense of hope. And that has been the mantra for my life. You know, although the streets of Lynchburg created despair, in an effort to escape that hopelessness, I would look at the Motorola in my grandmother's house next door. And the images in black and white that I would see on the TV screen were no more encouraging in the 1960s. And so again, I felt a sense both environmentally, beyond the environment, and existentially that I was in an area of hopelessness. But my parents, my grandparents, and my community served as a buffer to prevent this. Most of you recognize this man as the general of the civil rights movement, but you might not recognize my parents in the bottom corner or my sister in the upper corner. In 1961, my parents decided they wanted to imbue hope in my sister and I, so they attempted to integrate the school system in Lynchburg, Virginia. Only the second case in the history of Virginia. They lost that case. They were with a group of 4 other families. Those 5 other families. 4 of those families were dismissed. But they pursued, out of hope, the appeal. And they won at the state Supreme Court. And a year later, in 1962, they integrated the school system. The second case in Virginia. And when my sister, my late sister, you see there, stepped out of the car, she and the young man next to her stepped into history. And as a 4-year-old kid watching this showed me something different about hope. Hope was not this kind of vague thing, but hope, as my grandmother would say, hope is a verb. Hope is about action. And my grandmother, who was the descendant of Alsatian slaves, fluent in German and conversant in French, would say to me that we hope with our feet. And so, in the midst of all of this, in April of 1962, my parents, particularly my mother, was suffering under the weight of this integration suit. Now, mind you, there were black and white people who threatened to burn our house and blow up our house. And there is a famous minister from Lynchburg, Virginia, who was not very visible at the time, who rose up as the resistance to my family and developed moral majority. You can look online and see who that is. Who thought that my parents would never expect that their children would be anything more than a seamstress or a postal worker. And so my mother and sister, my father worked in Washington and commuted. My mother was extremely anxious about the threats. And so one day a man came to our house, one I knew and one I didn't know. Both were ministers. One was tall, I knew him, and the other was not so tall, neatly coiffed. And he spoke with his hands and he kept saying to my mother's sister with this African-American minister bravado. And I'm like, who is this guy as a kid? But my mother had been decorating our house like she was expecting royalty. It wasn't until 4 years later that I realized that this man that came was not royalty, but he was a king. And this was Martin Luther King. And so I asked my father, we went through this without any major problems. So the second lesson I learned about hope, I didn't learn from my father, and this is not advancing for me. I didn't learn from my mother. I learned from my father. And I asked my dad, I said, Dad, why did you put us through all of this risk of danger with this integration suit and people threatening to blow our house up? He said, I wanted to create opportunity for you. I wanted to create doors of opportunity. And he said that my father, who was a part-time musician, he said that the melody was hope, but the instrument was justice. And so for me, hope is not just about this vague dream. It's about action, and action that allows us to create justice in the world. That's number 10 on the UN list that you have. And so I'm a pediatric surgeon, so as I think, I wake up daily and I think about children, and I think that our most important responsibility, 18-year-old, you're a child still in my world, even though the country considers you an adult. Until age 26, you're in your mother's plan. And so, and so I can operate on you and take care of it. I was sitting next to your mother, ooh, I heard her, ooh. And so as we think about what's happening in this country, we measure the success of a country by a variety of parameters. Well, one of them is life expectancy and death rate. And if you look at this slide from the Financial Times from about a month ago, and you're probably aware of the Princeton professors Case and Deaton, who've talked about deaths of despair. But since 2015, life expectancy has been decreasing in the United States. Decreasing in the world's greatest country, so we think. And they argue in their book that it's the so-called deaths of despair. It's the deaths that are occurring in working class white men in middle America. And this got worse, this curve, after the pandemic. But as we go more closely to evaluate this precipitous drop out of proportion to COVID, the data really suggests to us it's not middle Americans. And in the Financial Times work, they state that, have left out something here, that 1 in 25 Americans between the ages of 5 and 40 will die. And so they ask rhetorically, why are so many Americans dying young? And these are the causes. Young Americans, and not just young Americans, not the white working class men in the middle America, but minorities, LGBTQ, and particularly not on this slide, the indigenous people. Indigenous women have the highest rate to these deaths of despair. And so I think they are from hopelessness. And I would argue that it is hopelessness, not mental health, but hopelessness, that is the defining public health crisis of our time. And this requires a certain degree of urgency. So I've told you, before 16 years ago, I was getting patents for cancer vaccines. I had a lab that developed immunotherapies for a tumor, but I decided one day, because not only is hope action, it's been said here, my grandmother said, hope was always. And so I wanted to move from success, academic success. I was a tenured professor, the immediate past president of a national organization, a ton of awards. I wanted to move from success to significance. And when I got to Cleveland, I recognized that there were multiple barriers to the success of young people, particularly in the urban corridor, due to these barriers that you see here that keep them, and I've doctored this slide up a bit, from getting through the obstacles that get them to hope. And so I developed a program. With a medical student called the Antifragility Initiative. And what the Antifragility Initiative is it's a holistic, person-centered violence intervention program. And it is designed to take those children who are at the tip of the spear, they may have been shot or severely beat up, and get into their lives and try to improve them. I didn't tell you that when I was a kid, I always dreamed about being a potter. I always dreamed about ceramics, but in Lynchburg, Virginia, there were racial restrictions at the art place, and I could never go. So I read everything I could about pottery. And I fell in love with the type of Japanese pottery known as kintsugi, and maybe you know about this artwork. And this is the ceramic that is based on a Japanese shogun who dropped the pot, it broke, and he was devastated. And he went around the country to find someone to fix his pot, to make it look like new. And he couldn't find anyone, and finally he found someone who said, I'll take it. And when he came back, that artisan had filled the broken pieces with liquid gold. And in fact, the pottery was more valuable and more beautiful after it was repaired. So when I looked at little Ray Ray, who was coming in, who had been shot, I thought that this was me 50 years ago, before Yale College with honors, All-American athlete, NCAA scholar athlete, top of my class at Harvard Medical School, first African-American super chief resident to Mass General, on and on and on. That we had a chance, I had an obligation to help fill those broken pieces with gold. And so anti-fragility is that concept that things that are broken and are repaired are stronger than they were when they were broken. Pulling off the Hemingway quote. So this is what we do. This is what we do with our social workers. We're one of 3 programs in the country, and we're unique in some aspects of our program. So a kid comes in beat up or shot to our emergency room, and I do my thing surgically, we take them to the OR, we do whatever. But we meet them once they're stabilized, when we think that's a teachable moment, when the most macho young man who's been shot is asking for his mommy, or he sees the white light. He is open for intervention. Within 48 hours of the accident, we are on the phone with them, or 48 hours of discharge, we're on the phone with them, and within a month we are in their home, in their schools as well. Because healthcare occurs in the hospital, but hope occurs in the community. And you can see the things that we do. We take care of them medically, we help their brain develop cognitively, we have arrangements with tutoring programs, and we feel strongly that having a sense of purpose and identity is critical in their progress. So we work on those three things. And the second thing we do, which we think is just as important, we help build a social infrastructure for them, because community is important. And I don't think you heal without community, and Catherine, I don't think you hope without a community. And I've watched you build a gigantic community of hope, and you are Antifragile. And so this is just our 3 years, so I had a hard time convincing our hospital to support this, and we have a very conservative right-wing governor who I tried presenting this program to when it was conceptualized, and he kept telling me, I don't have time to hear you. I kept walking with him. He said, I don't have time to hear you. Called his security people over. I kept talking, and 40 minutes later, he said, I think this is a great idea. Get it on paper, and we'll fund it. And that was $3.2 million ago, and now over 2,100 individuals and 400 children that we've taken care of.
Oh, wow.
So what I left out, what motivated me to do this is I had, and it's actually published today in Children's Hospitals Today, the kind of first-person narrative of this, but the bottom line is we were seeing these children. 30% of children, 6 to 16, who are shot who come into my institution will be back in 2 years shot again, including a 7-year-old I've taken care of, shot 3 times. How does that happen? And then another 30% will be back with a major depressive episode or suicide. Now mind you, Cleveland Public Schools, highest suicide rate in the country, highest child poverty rate in the country, highest infant mortality rate in the country. Those things we feel are linked. And we have an opportunity not just to hope in the manner of having great aspirations, but to hope in the manner of having actions. And so what we do is we move our patients from hurt to heal to hope, and we help them build community. And so I close by going back to that wisdom of the elders or the ancestors, that Afro-Caribbean woman who spoke German and French, who I asked her one day, I said, Grandma, in my red line neighborhood, we could walk 6 blocks in one direction and 3 blocks in another direction. I said, Grandma, this is our community. And she says, no, this is not our community. A community is a place where a group of people live together. She called me Ricky. She said, Ricky, this is our common unity. I said, Grandma, what's the difference? She said, this is a place where we can be for them and they can be for us. And so as we close what has been a monumental day, I hope the call to action, the fierce urgency of now, is that we will not just be a community or a group of people coming from such disparate areas, doing all these great things, but we can be for the world the way we want the world to be for us. Again, I'm sorry I went over my time. I want to tell you all thank you for this tremendous opportunity. I've been so immensely inspired, and I know in this moment, my sister who died unexpectedly 5 years ago is smiling. She is smiling in a big way. She was a Kellogg Fellow and did a lot of work in the ghettos of the Philippines. And I know you're not from the ghettos of the Philippines, but the way she is related to you is that she was a physical therapist. And she changed all of American physical therapy such that it would be a PhD program, a DPT. That was her baby. And for the person who said that my parents should never expect that their children would be anything more than a seamstress and a postman, the main office for the APTA in Alexandria, Virginia, the main conference room is named after my sister. So as we close today, I thank you for that opportunity, and I hope that we can catalyze and cascade hope. Thank you all.